Hello and welcome to Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. I'm Ken Coughlin.
And I'm Ben Lander.
Sorry, I was distracted by the ghost behind me. He's not really a ghost, he's a marshmallow man. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us here today. If this is your first time on watching the program, let us tell you a little bit about what it's all about. This is the weekly video podcast of Trinity Lutheran Church in Joppa, Maryland. And what we try to do here is Ben and I get together once a week and we talk about what that byline says, whatever people are talking about around the water cooler. But what makes this program unique and stand out from every other show out there that's talking about current events is we try to do it specifically by keeping Christ first and talk about, okay, how should Christians be talking about these issues if Jesus Christ really is our Lord and Savior? So we are still fallen humans. We may succeed in that. We may not succeed in that. You may agree with us. You may disagree with us, but that's at least what our goal is. Speaking of agreeing or disagreeing with us, you're invited to do that throughout the show. While we say...
Respectfully.
Yeah, respectfully, yes. While we say this is, Ben and I talk about it, and Mary Kay, our producer, will chime in sometimes as well. We also invite you to be part of the discussion, and the way you do that is by commenting. We are currently live both on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel and the Trinity Joppa Facebook page. If you have a thought about anything that we say here tonight, agree with us, disagree with us, whatever it may be, go ahead and type your comment in the live chat if you're on YouTube or in the comment section if you're on Facebook. When you do that, your comment should appear in that box over there to Ben's left. It will also appear on this lovely computer in front of me. And once we have a natural break in the conversation, you put something in there, I will read it out here on the air. And if you have a question, we'll answer a comment. We can interact back and forth. So we invite the interaction. Best shows are the ones where we have interaction. But again, like Ben said, the only caveat to that is keep it respectful. All right. And we, of course, will promise to do the same. Courtesy. I mean, that's the way we talk about these things, hopefully. So before we get into our stories for today, and we've only really got we'll call them three stories, main stories today. But before we get to those, we have a couple of orders of business off the top. The first thing is, let's do the Simone Biles thing first, and then we'll get into the comments from last week. We just wanted to give a follow-up, because last week we did talk about Simone Biles withdrawing, and not just specifically her, but we used her as kind of the context of the pressure, and we put too much pressure on Olympic athletes, and that she withdrew. Well, since we talked about that, she did actually I don't know how it actually worked, but she did compete again. Mm-hmm. And she didn't get back in time for the all-around, the individual all-around, or some of the other events, but she did get back in time and was able to compete in the individual balance beam and won a bronze medal out of it. So I thought that was, kind of neat. Now, I will say that a development, I didn't tell you this was coming, so surprise, a development that I've seen grow, especially among more conservative commentators over the past week, is they've taken issue with those who have described Miss Biles as a hero or heroic. A lot of commentators that I've seen have talked about the fact that, okay, we agree with what she did. We agree that, you've got to take care of your mental health, but we don't think that we should be necessarily praising someone as being a hero or, for doing that. I don't know how much we want to go into that. I guess my thought when I heard that more than anything was, look, and some of this we might get to tonight with some other terms that have come up in some of the comments from last week's show. That's just one of those terms. It's like, whether you want to call someone a hero or not. Why? Remember we talked, was it last week, the week before, we talked about sometimes it's like whether representing Christ is a matter of discernment and knowing when to speak up about something and when not to. And part of me just wonders, like, regardless of whether you think it was a heroic act or just an act that she should have done, but maybe not properly labeled heroic, when I hear them talking about this, the reaction I had was, okay, you're saying, it's kind of like you're saying, well, I agree she should have done what she did, but... And then so you spend 2 seconds saying that, and then you spend the next 30 minutes talking about this other topic.
Why she shouldn't,
or why we shouldn't be praising her as a hero. And it kind of did, while there's nothing mutually contradictory about those two views. I think you can hold them both consistently. It does seem to diminish, I guess, when you're saying, yes, she was right to do, it was okay for her to do what she did, when you talk all this other time about, but she's not a hero for doing it, you know?
Yeah, I think without getting caught up on the semantics of how exactly you define a hero, I think regardless, we can say, at least by admitting that she should have done what she did and then returning and overcoming that to a degree, I think that's inspirational, if nothing else. And so, is a hero someone who inspires you? Then yeah. I don't want to get hung up on semantics, but no, I think it's just an inspirational story of overcoming adversity.
Yeah, it just seems to me that it's one of those things, like, whether you're right, whether you agree with those comments, whether you disagree with those comments, it's like, why, what do you gain? What do you gain by going down that road? It just creates the impression that you're just going to disagree with anything. It's like, well, the people on the left all say that she's a hero, and I don't think she really is a hero. So what? So what? If you agree that she should, look, mental health is important, and here's another one that I heard, and I'll cards on the table on this. I had another person objecting that they didn't want to say anything positive about Simone Biles, because I don't know if you knew this or not, but she actually had a custom-made leotard where she had a picture of a goat put on the leotard. Okay, is that egotistical? Is that not humble at all? Absolutely.
Sure.
Do I like the fact that she did that? Nope, don't think she should have. But that doesn't mean that we say, well, then you just got to suck it up, and whether you're having mental illness or not, we think you should still hurl yourself through the air and possibly land on your head and break your neck just because we don't like the fact that you're egotistical and put a goat on your leotard. Right. It's like the two have nothing to do with each other. I mean, I will say wholeheartedly that when I heard about that, it's like, did that rub me the wrong way? Absolutely it did.
Sure.
I don't think she should have done that. But, I don't know her, so I can't say whether I like her personally or not. Never met the woman. But even if I don't like her, even if we don't get along at all, that doesn't mean anything when it comes to the question of, if you got someone who's suffering from some kind of some depression, mental bipolar, something like that, then they should get that treated. They should do what they need to take care of that. And they certainly shouldn't be pressured to do gymnastics, which is highly dangerous.
Yeah, if the situation were changed or altered to where it was a physical problem, this wouldn't even be a discussion.
Wouldn't even be a discussion.
She twisted her ankle. Of course, she should get that looked at, and then she came back to win bronze, right? That's...
As a matter of fact, one really cool story that I saw, and I will confess that I was the same way when this happened, but somebody took the Simone Biles situation and started looking at it, re-looking at the issue with Carrie Strug through the lens of the Simone Biles, and say, back then we all praised Carrie Strug for being so courageous, but she had a very serious injury when really, and she was a kid that, well, from what we now know, possibly getting abused. I don't know if she was one of those there, but certainly getting influenced by Bella Caroli, her coach at the time, and Bella Caroli's trying to encourage her to get back out there. Why didn't we respond at the time with outrage and saying, no, she's hurt?
Some people did.
Yeah, sure.
Some people did. And, but it's easy. Well, first off, I think it's easy to forget that Olympic athletes, like we said, last week, that particularly in the women's, the quote women's, because that's what they call it, women's gymnastics, that in that, and even in the ice skating, where also they can do some things that are very dangerous.
Yeah. Yes.
They're literally running around on knives
on a hard surface.
And if they're with a partner, then I've seen people get injured by their partners.
Knives. Foot knives. We'll call them foot knives.
It's Kate's.
Look, they're called blades. Okay. They're foot knives.
Okay. But my point being is that they're referred to as, it's referred to as the women's. Mm-hmm. And we forget sometimes that those young ladies are just that. They're young ladies. And, and it's easy to do that because what do you think when a football player gets injured, and it's the Super Bowl.
Right.
Yeah.
If you expect them to make a decision based on how maybe serious the injury is, and
make it educated and make the right decision,
and make an educated decision on. I mean, there's a lot of fans who are like, it's the Super Bowl. Get back out there if you can. I'm not saying it's the right thing, but
No, and,
that's
that,
what
and that's the point. Is that sometimes I think we as fans, we as the nation, when it comes to the Olympics, we put too much pressure on these people, and that obscures their ability to make the right and
maybe.
appropriate decision.
Well, you know,
and it can. And there's a risk of that, and we
yeah.
should be aware of that.
Yeah, there's
and
this looming pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my point about the term hero, I guess there's a part of me that does object to it, but it has nothing to do with my definition of the term hero. It has more to do with the fact that the media built her up and built her up and built her up as being the GOAT or being America's darling and shoe in for getting us the team gold and her the individual gold and probably gold all around gold. And that added to the pressure that she was probably feeling and the issues that she was probably having with her mental health. And then we turn around and we keep her up there on that pedestal.
Well, and I don't want to discount the fact that there's...
And I just think that maybe by, continuing to label her that way, are we again putting pressure on her?
We are, but then it's, there's also personal responsibility on her part. I don't want to elevate one without the other. I mean, she did embrace it and put it on her leotard.
No, well, okay,
and she does make money off of the role too. Let's face it. I just walked into the grocery store the other day, and her face is still plastered on this big cardboard cutout. Everywhere, all over the place. She makes money off this. So, is there a responsibility on her part to do her job? Yes, to the same extent that it's one of our responsibility when we make a commitment to an employer or whatever to do our job. But you know what? If we got hurt, if we had some kind of mental breakdown or something like that, nobody out there doing your job would expect you should be going to work that day. But it's the same thing for her.
No. And I'm not saying anything about what she did. I'm saying something about what the press is doing about, building her up. She feels the pressure, makes the choice. Well, they're still building her up by calling her a hero for making this choice. It's still kind of sticking her up there on that pedestal. Is that helping her any? Do you know what I'm saying?
No, you're right.
I mean, yes, you can agree that she made the right choice, but to start throwing down, all this
there's two sides.
Hero worship.
Yeah.
Throwing down all the hero worship, you wonder, I'm wondering, not whether or not she deserves it as much as wondering or not, is that equally detrimental to her?
Well, and too often I think also people will point to say, well, this side bears blame. And as we'll see in a moment, I think maybe with a comment I want to go into from last week's episode, even conceding that this person has blame does not mean that somebody else does not also have some blame or you don't like blame contributing to it. And so I can disagree with her putting the goat on her leotard, but that doesn't mean that we in the media shouldn't be building her ego up so much either.
And that's, I guess, that, like I'm saying, my maybe uncomfortableness with calling her a hero has a little bit more to do with, is that letting her off the hook or keeping her on it, so to speak, with the pressure.
It might be even more pressure now. I get it.
So now every decision I make has to be heroic.
Maybe it might have something to do also psychologically. We're hardwired to perceive, when we have somebody up on a pedestal like this, and when they show themselves to be fallible, that actually makes them more likable because they're more relatable.
Yes.
So there's a natural tendency to want to put her right back up on that pedestal because now she's endeared herself even more in some sense psychologically.
Yeah.
By being relatable.
To make an idol out of her. I'm sorry.
No. Well, I mean, we do.
We got to move on because this was
supposed to have to be worried about.
I know this is supposed to be a quick off the top, so we got to move on. The next topic on our list is the. Don't change the byline yet, or the lower third yet, because we have to talk about comments from last week's episode. Yep. We do have a number of comments from last week's episode. 3 from Brian Brownell, who's one of our regular viewers and commenters. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
And Brian did the awesome thing this week of putting time codes.
Everybody be like Brian.
Everybody be like Brian, yes. Because if you remember, if you were watching last week, he said something, I can't remember what it was, but Ben and I was like, what was that in the context? And we couldn't remember. And so this week, Brian put time codes on everything, so we know exactly what he's referring to with every comment. And that's just absolutely awesome. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about here in general, obviously we're on live every Wednesday night at 5:30. Although, what is it? Today's the 4th. Yeah, we're not going to be on next week. I say that right now. I'll say it again at the end. There's not going to be a show next week. We're taking next week off. We will be back in 2 weeks, however. Now, that being said, what we try to do is even if you can't watch the show live, if you're watching it after the fact, obviously you won't be able to comment in the live chat and have us interact with you live if you're watching it after the fact, but we still want you to be part of the discussion. So the way you do that is by leaving a comment on the YouTube page. We ask you do go over to YouTube to leave it, and leave your comment below the video there, and any comments we receive between last week's episode and when the next week episode airs, we'll take up first thing at the start of the following episode. Unless it gets to the point where we're getting so many comments that we can't. But right now, that's not a problem. So we do have a few comments here from last week's episode that we'll go over. The first three, like I said, were from Brian. There's some overlap here, but his first comment, he said, "I'd be interested in hearing your opinions on the state of Christianity in America today." That was in response to, there was a comment made by Tim Foster that led to some discussion, and I had made the comment that, that could lead into a whole other discussion about the state of Christianity today. And Brian, what I'll say in regard to that, what I was thinking when I said that kind of ties in, I kind of did go into my thoughts a little bit, because your second comment, where you just said exactly was the comment, was in response to me talking about definitional boundaries. That, any group, and obviously to be a Christian, you have to have boundaries that define what that term means.
Yep.
And if you get rid of those boundaries, then you lose, the term itself loses all meaning.
Like the term hero?
Oh, I see what you did there. And so Brian commented exactly to that. And that's what was going through my mind, Brian, just so you know, when I made that first comment about the state of Christianity today. That's kind of what I was thinking. So we did end up going into it anyway, is that I do think that the Christian church, not by and large, but in large part, many aspects of the Christian church has kind of lost sight on what those broad boundaries are.
We've blurred the lines
Yeah.
Pretty significantly in some areas. But
yeah. And so that's kind of what I was getting at there. And I do think that we do, with grace, respectfully, we need to kind of define what those lines are. And those lines, in my mind, should be defined by the gospel. I mean, that's what makes you a Christian, the core gospel message. And the way we can gracefully define those lines is not to get into bickering matches with people. It's to preach the gospel, to say, look, I'm a Christian. As a Christian, this is what I believe. And this is why I believe it, and bring people to Christ that way.
Yeah, and there's a reason why the early church even, this is not really anything new. It just comes around in different forms every so often. The early church had to formulate creeds. That's why we have the creeds that we stand on. We can say, this is our statement of faith. This is what we believe. These are the parameters here. These are the non-negotiables. And I think, we tend to lose sight of that sometimes. But it's helpful to look back and say, yep, I affirm all of these things. And the moment that we start to stray away from those, we really should start questioning, whether we can rightly call ourselves Christian.
Yeah, and that's always been a fascination of mine. I think a lot of that bears up there's culture. Historically speaking, Christianity has been not so much anymore. We've talked about the trending, but historically, Christianity has almost been tied to American culture throughout the 20th century, especially. And so it almost, I think some groups felt like, in order to be accepted, whether this was conscious or unconscious, it felt like in order to be accepted, they had to be able to call themselves Christian. So there's a hesitancy, even when you start your beliefs start veering away from that common core, you still want to say, but we believe in Jesus, so we're still Christian. But then you break it down and say, okay, but let's talk about this Jesus you believe in, and that Jesus you believe in bears little to no resemblance to who we say Jesus was.
Even the demons believe in God.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's at some point, it's kind of like, I use this as an example. It's like, hey, we both talk about the fact that we know a guy named John, and we start talking back and forth to each other as if, we're talking about the same person. Before you realize it, I'm talking about John who lives in California, 6'2" with red hair, and you're talking about John who's 5'1" and with dark, long black hair and lives in Florida.
That reminds me of the movie Courageous.
Why? I'm forgetting something, obviously, about the movie. I love that movie.
What is the
the carpenter guy?
Yeah.
Who they thought they had the mistaken identity thing. That's how he got the job. Yeah. That was a funny scene. But anyway, but that's my point, is just because you call someone has the same name doesn't mean you're talking about the same person.
Yep.
And so that's why you do need, I think, those boundary lines, and just to give meaning to what you're talking about. That's what words.
A lot of what has happened, I think, by the mixing of culture and Christianity, like we become cultural Christians to the extent where in some instances we have to question whether or not we're worshiping a caricature of Jesus rather than the real Jesus. So
Well, and nowadays you're complicated by the fact that you've got this movement for the historical Jesus, which starts out with a presupposition that the Jesus of history is not the same as the Jesus of faith. Of course, we as Christians would say, no, there is no difference between the Jesus of history and Jesus of faith. The Jesus of the Christian faith is historical.
Absolutely.
Matter of fact, our entire faith is based upon the occurrence in history of a historical event, the crucifixion, the resurrection of Christ. Like Paul himself says, if that didn't happen, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, our faith is pointless. It's not based on anything.
And like it or not, the Gospels are a historical document testifying to that.
Yeah. All right. It's funny because, this comment came up from Brian where I was originally kind of not trying to divert the conversation. Now I feel like we could go down that path forever too, about the historical Jesus and everything. Bart Ehrman doesn't know what he's talking about. Sorry. Anyway, the third comment that Brian has here is in relation to our conversation about Lecrae. And kind of towards the end of that conversation, I kind of made the comment about, I've just seen so many times when people say, I'm trying to remember exactly how I phrased it, but they say something, and it's like, well, maybe I shouldn't necessarily be taking them to be meaning X, Y, and Z. But I've seen so many times when somebody says that they're really going down this path that it's hard for me.
About being basically religious, but spiritual, but not
religious kind of thing, and it really is just an excuse for not coming to church. Well, Jesus said to gather, and he says it there. He has a quote. He says, "I'm a Christian, but I don't believe everything in the Bible." That's another example. I hear that one a lot too. It's like, well, then, and that gets back. That's what all these are kind of boundaries. It gets back to the boundaries. Well, what do you mean? And when I hear somebody say that, I will try as respectfully as possible. I'll ask the question. Well, what do you mean by you're a Christian? And you're not in attacking mode, but let's explore that. Because like you were talking about before, how can you, what does it mean to call yourself Christian? What does it mean to call yourself a follower of Christ if we don't share some at least broad common definitional terms of what that means?
Right.
And one of the things would be, I think, the Bible's the inspired word of God, obviously, because, well, again, another rabbit trail we could go down. Do you need to believe in the inspiration of the Bible in order to get any valuable historical information from it? No. I think one of the most powerful arguments for the resurrection of Jesus Christ is that even if the Bible isn't the inspired word of God, and you just treat it with using the same standards you would any other historical document, historians would any historical document, you come up with a number of facts, historical facts that most historians of the time period agree upon, even if they don't believe, even if they're not Christians. And from those minimal facts, from those basic facts, you can actually look at those and through inference of the best explanation conclude the only way to explain all those facts for all those things to be true is for Jesus to have actually risen from the dead.
Occam's razor, the most simple explanation is probably the right one.
Things like the fact that Jesus did exactly in fact exist, that he was crucified, that he was buried in a known tomb, that tomb was in fact empty. These are all facts that the Paul changed dramatically. These are all facts that the vast majority of historians of that time period agree are in fact true, even if they don't accept that Jesus actually rose from the dead. They'll still concede, for example, but that tomb was probably empty. And so you look at these all in conjunction, you say, okay, give me an explanation for how all these facts can be true if Jesus didn't rise from the dead. And there isn't. Anytime any explanation comes up with the swoon theory or things like that, it's like, no, one of those facts was that Jesus actually died. That's one of the facts that's ever conceded. It's like, so the swoon theory doesn't work. And these other alternatives that people come up with always fail to explain one or more of those acknowledged facts. The only thing that explains them all, the best explanation from them all, is that Jesus did in fact rise from the dead. And that kind of argument, as much as now I am kind of going down a rabbit trail, it's one of my favorite rabbit trails to go down.
Spoken like a true apologist.
Exactly. That does not depend upon the Bible being the holy inspired word of God. But you still get there. And that's why I still include that as part of those boundaries. Because if you believe Jesus rose from the dead, then you start looking, well, what did Jesus teach? Well, Jesus, did rely upon the Gospels as the word of, or the scriptures as the word of God. And so it's like you can't come to the conclusion that Jesus is Lord and Savior and follow his teachings without also coming to the conclusion that the Bible is inspired by God. Yeah. So you still get there. You just don't need to start there, but you still get there.
Yeah.
And I know a bunch of presuppositionalists just got angry with me for the way I presented that. You know what? Can't we all be friends? All right.
Apparently not.
I grew up Calvinist. All right. Other comments we have here. From F, just the initial F, Saleh. I apologize for mispronouncing that. Saleeh. Maybe it's Saleh. And this is in regard to our conversation about Israel and the occupied territories in Israel, and Ben & Jerry's is no longer going to be selling their ice cream within just the occupied lands that Israel is occupying, the West Bank, East Jerusalem in particular. And what he says here, he, maybe she, I apologize, like it's just an initial, I don't know. It says, it's an occupied land, don't you get it? It's an apartheid state, and I'll be buying their ice cream every day. First thing I'll say to you is, if you want to buy their ice cream every day, go for it. You know what? That's freedom. That's expression.
Sure.
You know, we talk about different issues on here. We may agree, we may disagree. How you choose to express your view, go for it. You know, I got no problem with that. I may not do it myself, but I didn't buy Ben & Jerry's to begin with, as we established last week.
I remember the last time I had Ben & Jerry's. So that doesn't really affect me then.
It doesn't affect me much at all. But I did find out. I've got a lot of people from you all, from Pastor Jay, actually sent me a picture that I asked the question last week, does Ben & Jerry's make a mint chocolate chip? And apparently they do. I don't remember what it's called. Yeah, no, it's not. You guys told me on the air. Then Pastor Jay actually got a picture of it, and he messaged me a picture. Mint chocolate chunk.
Yeah,
so
the chips are bigger.
The chips are bigger. Okay, whatever. They're fudgy? You're saying they're fudgy? Okay. All right. Well, then, is that still mint chocolate chip? Never mind. We're not going to go. What does it mean to be mint chocolate chip? What's the boundaries? What are the definitions?
Does the chip have to be hard and crispy, or can it be soft and chewy?
Anyway, let's go back to the comment from F. Soleil, where he does say, he goes on to say it's an occupied land. I think we can agree on that. It is an occupied land. Then he says it's an apartheid state. All right. Here's the comment where, and, you know, hear me out, where I think we might disagree a bit on that. All right. And here's why I don't like the use of that term. And this has broader implications as well, and why generally you're not going to hear me. I'm not saying I won't slip up. I will avoid a lot of the hot terms of the day, because I think that certain terms carry with them certain expectations, certain presuppositions. And I also firmly believe that's why some people use them, because they want to create that impression, fairly or unfairly. And whereas my viewpoint is, let's talk about the actual issue itself and what's actually happening, going on, without bringing in the baggage of particular words. That term, an apartheid state, I think is one of them, because obviously you hear that and it's going to take you back to the atrocities that were going on in South Africa, probably most well known, and
Rwanda. Yeah.
Rwanda, right. And so when you hear that term, and that term itself carries that baggage, and I think that actually gets in the way of us having a meaningful conversation about what is actually happening in these occupied territories. I will tell you my view on it. You can agree with it, you can disagree with it. Ben, you can chime in if you feel you want to. But that's why, regardless of how I feel, I don't like using that term, because I think it carries a certain baggage with it and obscures our ability to have the conversation. As far as what is going on, are there things going on in those territories, in East Jerusalem, in the West Bank, that do I see why, for example, you use that term? I know, I get it. I see where you're coming from. There are limitations, for example, on the freedom of movement, where Israel does limit the Palestinians' ability to use certain roadways, or certainly to cross the border, especially at certain times of year. There's a lot of restrictions on them doing things like that. First of all, does what's going on there rise to the level of what was going on in Rwanda or South Africa? No, it does not. And that's why I don't think we should use terms like that, because you're creating an expectation or a feeling that I don't think that is justified. Does that mean that what Israel is doing is justified? Well, there's room for discussion. That's debatable, because here's the big problem that I have when we get into discussions like this. Lots of times, and this kind of gets into what we were talking about earlier, where you've got a long-standing conflict, and I don't know if we need to go into the whole history. I'm prepared to do it if we want to. I mean, suffice to say, short answer, Britain had control of the area. 1947, Britain gave up control of the area. UN says, okay, we're going to divide it into a Israeli state and an Arab state. Israel says, okay. Arabs say, no way. Fighting ensues, all right? Israel ends up taking over a lot of the territory. Certain territory they don't take. Jordan was actually in possession of the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Egypt was in possession of the Gaza Strip. More fighting ensues, 6-day war. Israel takes over both. This is the quick summary of the history. Israel takes over both. Israel ends up giving up control of the Gaza Strip, but they end up putting settlements everywhere. They actually pull their settlements out of the Gaza Strip. They don't pull their settlements out of the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Those start to grow, and so now the West Bank is kind of a Swiss cheese area, with all these different islands.
Describing it.
Yeah, and now you have the situation where. I think even a majority of UN nations, although not a vast majority, but the UN nations say, no, there's a state of Palestine. A lot of other UN nations say, no, there's not a state of Palestine. So we don't have universal agreement on whether a state of Palestine even exists. But the countries that had control of those areas, meaning Jordan for the West Bank and East Jerusalem, Egypt for Gaza Strip, those two countries have both now renounced their claims on those areas. So at no point was there a state of Palestine that was officially recognized by everybody that had control of those areas. The question is whether or not there should have been formed a state of Palestine because of the UN resolution before and everything before. It's complicated.
Yeah.
All right? It's a complicated history. Even if there's disputed territory that Israel thinks is theirs and Palestinians thinks theirs, does that excuse what Israel's doing? Well, let's talk about that, because what Israel's done is they restrict freedom of movement. They do say, especially during certain Israeli holidays, Jewish holidays, that, if you're a Palestinian, you can't cross the border at all. Why do they do that? Because of terror attacks that were being carried out.
Sure.
Now we can debate and we can have a discussion as far as whether that was the appropriate response. I would hope everybody could agree that Israel has the right to defend itself from terrorist attacks. They do. Now, whether or not the proper solution to do that is to tell Palestinians to restrict the freedom of movement for many of which probably are not involved in the terrorist attacks, and to, let's face it, make a racial determination based on your race, whether you can cross the border or not, whether you can use this roadway or not.
That's segregation, but
it's one of those things where I think we if we're going to have an open and honest discussion about it, everybody involved needs to be willing to openly and honestly acknowledge the roles that all the various parties have played in bringing this about. It's like when you got kids getting in an argument and each one just wants to say the other one's completely to blame, when both of them have contributed in some way or shape or form to the escalation. That's kind of what I think is a fair description of what's happened over there. And so, do I agree with everything about the way Israel is necessarily treating people in those occupied territories? No, I don't think I would say I do. Do I think it's fairly characterized as an apartheid state? No, I do not think. I do not think that. Do I think that the Palestinians are completely blameless in this escalation of the conflict? No, I don't think that either. It's complicated. It's complicated.
And this even goes back to what we're talking about, even something like the simple definition of terms. When we don't have a clear outline, then the lines get blurred and messiness ensues. And the same thing is true with countries. When you don't have a clear border, you've got this Swiss cheese, and I like that explanation of it, where there's blurred lines. And so you're right. I think you did a great job kind of illustrating the whole history of it in kind of a nutshell. And so there isn't a clear, easy label we can slap on it. So yeah, I agree with your assessment that we should avoid calling it apartheid, because that does carry baggage. You're right. At the same time, I don't think we're not going to see an easy resolution to any of this anytime soon until clear boundaries can be drawn, and that's debatable.
Or if Jesus returns.
How realistic that is. Also,
yeah. Done.
No more boundaries anyway.
So I appreciate the comment. Thank you very much. And hopefully, if you're happen to watching this episode, you have additional follow-up, feel free, happy to talk about it. The last comment from last week's episode, we had a lot, was from Bojo, B-O-J-O. A very short, simple comment: boycott Ben and Jerry's. So obviously, Bojo does not agree with F. Saleh. And all I'll say to Bojo is the same thing I said to SLA. If that's how you choose to express your opinion, that's your right. Go for it, either way. So,
yeah.
All right. So we are now 35 minutes into our show make me very happy we only have 3 topics for tonight, because it's 35 minutes before we actually get into our first one. But Ben, what's our first official story for tonight?
All right, so the first official story, we've got a couple different news outlets that have been covering this, and there's plenty more. These are just a couple that we've drawn from, but all kind of covering the same thing. that last month the state of Mississippi presented a brief to the Supreme Court, basically and effectively arguing that it should overturn Roe v. Wade. And if you're familiar with Roe v. Wade, it's a very famous case that made abortions legal and made and there's a lot of questions we'll probably get into. I'll let Ken kind of get into all that. We've alluded to it before on this show, but just how very untenable if you're a strict originalist with the Constitution, which our Supreme Court majority claim to be originalists with the Constitution in regards to their jurisprudence. So Mississippi is arguing that Roe and Casey is another famous case, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, were wrongly decided and should be overruled. And this has to do with the law that Mississippi passed that prohibits abortions after the 15th week of a woman's term of pregnancy. So it does include exceptions for fetal abnormalities and medical emergencies. So there are provisions in there. It's not a blanket prohibition of all abortions after the 15th week. But it went through the district courts. It went through the Fifth Circuit that Mississippi's a part of, and now has gone up to the Supreme Court, where Mississippi is arguing strictly on one question. That's kind of the scope. They're limiting the scope to one question. Here's the one question: are all laws restricting pre-viability abortions unconstitutional? That's strictly what the Supreme Court is agreeing to rule on in the fall. So they're looking at the unconstitutionality of pre-viability abortions. So that's aborting anything before they are viable. And when we get to that. So in the case of Mississippi, that's anything after 15 weeks is what they have prohibited. There have been a lot of, there's reasons that have been made by the state of Mississippi. It's Fitch, who is the Attorney General, right? of Mississippi, says no other right involves, as abortion does, the purposeful termination of a potential life. And she makes an argument here that says that the American landscape has changed since 1973. 1973 was the ruling of Roe v. Wade. She said, for example, adoption is accessible and on a wide-scale basis, or on wide scale. Contraceptives are more available and effective, and scientific advances show that an unborn child has taken on the human form and features months before viability. So she's arguing from the standpoint that we've made advancements in availability of contraceptives, for example, and scientific markers for when a fetus takes on human form, which is well before the 15-week mark. So she said states, the power of the state, should be able to act on those developments. And she says Roe and Casey shackle states to a view of the facts that is decades out of date. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Can you,
Mr. Lawyer?
as you're going through this, can you remind people what each of those original cases?
Yeah, we'll go through that. Matter of fact, let's start with that. For those of you that don't know, I'm a lawyer, so here you go. So people understand the history of this. What's all the hubbub about? How was Roe v. Wade decided? What does Planned Parenthood versus Casey stand for? If you were to look at the Constitution, all right, and you were to look for any language anywhere in the United States Constitution that says you have a right to an abortion, women have a right to get an abortion, and understand the implication of Roe is that because the court said that there's a constitutional right involved here, then states aren't free to disagree with that. Federal Constitution trumps any state law. And so whatever they say that the Constitution guarantees, the states can't pass a law that disagrees with that. All right. That's why abortion is currently permitted in all 50 states, because they've said in the Roe case, they said there's a constitutional right to it. But like I said, if you were to read Roe, if you read the United States Constitution, you'd be very hard pressed to find any language that says, oh, look, a woman has a right to abortion. All right. It's not there. So how did the Roe court reach that conclusion? Well, what they did is they looked at the rights that are there in the United States Constitution and said, oh, look, so a lot of these rights involve privacy. The right to not have, unlawful searches and seizures, for example, imposed against you. These are privacy rights. And so we look at the penumbra of the right of the Constitution, and we think there's an overall right to privacy that is that's included in the Constitution. And then, so that was step one. Step one was say, well, there's nothing explicitly in there, but we think overarching all of these things, there's an right to privacy. That was flawed to begin with, and we've talked about that previously on the show. First of all, to even try to find a new right, that we're calling it a penumbra, but even if there is a penumbra of privacy rights, that does not mean that every possible conceivable right to privacy is something that's guaranteed by the Constitution. You can have, let's say we have 10 different rights that are all privacy rights. The Constitution says you have 3 of them. You can't conclude just because it says you have 3 of them that you therefore have the other 7. It doesn't say that, just because they're also rights to privacy. But that's essentially what the Roe court did, is they said, well, because these rights that are included are rights to privacy, we think there's a general right to privacy, and we also think that the right to a woman's right to make a decision about whether or not to have abortion is a right to privacy. Therefore, we're going to find that there's a right to abortion.
Someone needs to let Facebook know about those rights to privacy.
So then once they did that, they then, started balancing it against, they also said, well, the state also has a right for potential life, is kind of how they put it. Whole other dispute there. And then they said, well, and then we're going to balance these rights against each other, and here's what we're going to find out. And that's kind of where the whole viability thing came into play, where they talked about how, before viability, there were certain things states could do. After viability, they couldn't. And that's where you get the whole trimester discussion. We talked about that on previous shows. I won't go into all of that again. But that's basically how the Roe court reached this decision that there's a right to privacy. Then Planned Parenthood versus Casey very quickly was another case that came up later on. I believe that was actually a plurality decision, not a majority decision to begin with. But Planned Parenthood versus Casey essentially added this, what's called the undue burden test. It kind of took a different approach to Roe. It still agrees that the right's there, the fundamental right is there. But then the approach it took to deciding whether or not a law violates that right dealt more with, well, if it creates an undue burden on the woman in achieving, if whatever law you pass in the state creates an undue burden on a woman acting upon her right to an abortion, then you can't do it, and that's where you get into things like parental consent laws fall under that, notification laws and everything, and spousal notification. Those laws are all evaluated under that Planned Parenthood versus Casey standard. I said on this show, I don't remember how long ago, because we talk about this quite a bit, but one of the times I mentioned on this show that even many scholars, legal scholars, who are adamantly pro-choice, who believe in abortion, unfettered abortion, they want that to be the law of the land. I made the statement that even many of those folks will probably not, some of them not even behind closed doors, will openly tell you that from a legal analysis standpoint, Roe is an embarrassment. It is laughable, okay? That is not legal reasoning, okay? What the Roe court did is not legal reasoning at all. It's vastly different than any other way the court has ever interpreted the Constitution in the past. It is a clear case of the court wanting to reach a desired conclusion and stretching things any way they had to in order to get there. One of the articles we read this week, I was very pleased today, from the USA Today, said the exact same thing and cited a number of people. This is an article by Ryan T. Anderson and Robert P. George in the USA Today from August 3rd, so just yesterday. And I want to read some of what this article said. It said, even some notable legal scholars who favor legal elective abortion as a policy have been willing to acknowledge this being what I just talked about, that it's a joke. It's horribly decided. Writing in the Yale Law Journal in 1973, the year Roe was decided, John Hart Ely of Harvard Law School, later dean of Stanford Law School, derided the decision as bad because it is bad constitutional law, or rather because it is not constitutional law, and gives almost no sense of an obligation to try to be. And they list off some other people. I won't go through the whole thing. Lawrence Tribe, writing for the Harvard Law Review, said the same thing. Edward Lazarus, who was the former law clerk to Henry Blackmun, who wrote the Roe decision, Also went on to write, as a matter of constitutional interpretation and judicial method, Roe borders on the indefensible, because it is. I mean, there's no such thing as looking to a penumbra of rights to try to find some other right. That was judicial activism at its finest. So that is basically what Mississippi is challenging. And what makes this very unique from a legal perspective, I want to make sure people understand this, is that whenever one of the biggest challenges in any legal dispute, in this case, whether it's Roe or anything else, any other issue, in trying to get the Supreme Court to decide your case, it's very, very difficult to get them to address the broader issue. The way that the court kind of has a policy that if they can decide a case on a narrower ground, then they will decide the case on the narrower ground. They try with every fiber of their being not to decide and overturn and even address the broader issues if they don't have to. All right. So all these other abortion cases have come up to the Supreme Court over the years, but the court has never really been inclined to address the constitutionality or the correctness of Roe v. Wade. They just haven't, and they've avoided that. Well, Mississippi ain't letting them get away with it.
They're aiming right at it.
Here's our argument.
Yep.
This is it.
Yeah.
Roe says we can't do this before during the first trimester. We did it. Tell us we're wrong. And so that's actually very unique. And it looks like one of these articles even said the court in granting what's called granting cert, saying they're going to hear the case, they say what the question is that they're going to address.
Can I interrupt for a second? You're saying that Roe, I'm sorry, you're saying that
Hold on one second, finish that thought. But the court has said is that is the question they're going to address. Yeah. The court has acknowledged that too. Sorry, Mary Kay, go ahead.
Okay, so if I'm understanding the very basics, Roe says that during the first trimester, abortions are allowed. During the second trimester, states can regulate abortions, and during the last one, they're not allowed. Is that right? What is kind of
very, I mean, as far as how they can regulate it, there's certain things they can do. I mean, it gets to the point where the only regulations they're allowed to impose under Roe, and keep in mind, Roe, in this regard, Roe's kind of been eroded. This isn't really the law anymore.
But I mean, it was only...
But it was only in cases where, like, for the health of the mother, for example. And so even the grounds on which they were allowed to continue to regulate it weren't really in regard to the interests of the unborn child, if that makes sense.
Yeah, still even in terms of viability.
But okay,
yeah.
So yes, you can have it first trimester. No to the last trimester. The one in the middle is you can only were abortions allowed or not allowed?
It's not, abortions were allowed. Yes, there were the states. What happened is the states' right to restrict abortion diminished as it went along under Roe. And again, this is not the case anymore. And so in the first trimester, pretty much they were allowed to do whatever they wanted to. When you look at trimesters, it really is more viability. And then, but after this, in the second trimester, it's like, okay, well, once you have some restrictions on abortion, state you can impose some restrictions on abortion, but only those that are related to this, and I can't remember what they all were, but it was all stuff that was, again, it was really more geared towards the health of the mother and things like that.
But my point is that they said the only time they said no to abortions was during the third trimester.
Like,
as the law of the land.
If you a strict reading, technically you might say yes, but as a practical matter, it was the last two, because the restrictions really were phrased in such a way that they're easy to get around. They were easy to basically, for the doctor or the mother to say, well, because of X, Y, or Z, you can't. I've got to be able to do it.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of almost a
health of the mother could be
mental health. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And so it really was. They were figurehead. They were kind of figurehead concessions to the state at that point.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is what Mississippi is arguing has to do with they're saying what does Mississippi want again?
Mississippi wants at 15 weeks. And keep in mind that, because remember I was telling you that the Roe standard isn't really the standard anymore. They're arguing on viability. Okay. And what the viability standard and the way that's kind of evolved is, in a nutshell, before the baby's viable, restrictions are more okay. The restrictions are
Looser.
yeah, and whereas the state has, the child, the consideration for the child, or the future being the potential life, basically changes, at viability. And so what they're trying to say is, generally speaking, at 15 weeks, the way the existing law is that you at 15 weeks you wouldn't have the right, the state, to limit abortion in any way, shape, or form, generally speaking.
But that doesn't sound like that's what Roe said.
Like I said, Roe has evolved since the time Roe. The only real relevance to Roe nowadays is that fundamental right that it found.
Well, that's also kind of the argument that Fitch is making, the Attorney General of Mississippi, because she's saying, yeah, Roe's evolved over time because
nobody can make sense of it.
Nobody can make sense of it, and also the American landscape, she's saying, has evolved over time to the point where there's new considerations to be made.
You have some comments.
I see that, yeah. So Ryan Iwanowski has asked a couple of things here on YouTube. He said, number one, if Roe v. Wade is about patients' privacy to the abortion, couldn't that same argument be used to stop mandating vaccination, since it would violate your medical privacy? I'm giving out a lot of legal advice tonight, I think. So the answer to that, Ryan, is remember what else I said about the right to privacy. I talked about how they found the right to privacy, and then once they found that right, they then balanced it against the state's interest. So they said the woman has the interest in her medical privacy, and on that I would say, Ryan, to answer your question, is yes. I think there's a general right to your medical right to privacy that involves your medical interest in determining what was done and is not done to your body. Okay, that's only half of the discussion. Then the rest of the discussion is, okay, now what is the state's interest? And then we're going to weigh them against each other. And in the Roe case, they kind of looked at the state interest and they really dropped it way down here. They basically said, first of all, the state's interest is only in potential life, all right? And so what they did is they're looking at these and they dropped this interest, the state interest, way down here, the woman's interest way up here, and so they erred on the side of the woman's interest, basically. So any issue, whether it's abortion, whether it's vaccination mandates, and I'm not going to give you an opinion on the legality of vaccination mandates, it's too new of an issue. I don't know. I'm sure somebody's going to challenge them in court. It's going to happen, all right? But that's the framework. Yes, I think you are probably correct that there is going to be an individual interest, an individual right. But then the question then becomes, how are courts going to define the state's interest, and how are they going to balance those out? And that's what remains to be seen.
Speaking of state's interest with Roe, when they drop it down way down here like this, like you're saying, I want to point to this one part in this article where it talks about historical scholarship by Professors Charles Rice and Michael Stokes. Paulson, along with more, said that that it demonstrates that it was well established that the unborn were considered legal persons at the time of the ratification of the 14th Amendment. So looking at the 14th Amendment, you see that the state's interests say that the unborn are a legal person under citizenship. That's what the 14th Amendment has to deal with. So they are citizens, unborn citizens, yet. Yeah, so they really tipped the balance of the scales on that one.
They really did. And the other thing Ryan says here is, what if God is using vaccination mandates to reevaluate Roe v. Wade? Look, I'm not going to presume to know what God's doing. I will say this, in fairness, that this case started out in 2018. All right? Understand it takes a while for it to get to the Supreme Court. So, this case certainly began, and meaning that, and understand, in order to preserve an issue for appeal, you've got to raise it every step of the way. So when this case began in 2018, the Mississippi Attorney General had to have the foresight at that point to say, here's my argument. Point blank, I'm challenging Roe. So she had to have made that argument even back then in order for the court to be hearing it now. So I will just say that. We have a couple comments here, I think, on Facebook as well. Or one comment from Jay Jackson, who says, penumbra sounds like conundrum. I don't think that's a coincidence. Because that's exactly what it's created, when they try to say that's the penumbra. We find this rights for the penumbra of the interest or whatever. It's like, and they've created a conundrum where you have, anytime you have, because the courts, the judicial system does kind of have a framework that it uses to evaluate constitutional questions. And Roe kind of threw that framework out the window. And when you do that, you create this almost aimless situation where people have no idea, and the court has no idea how to interpret that, how to go with that, because you can't interpret Roe using your ordinary constitutional principles, because Roe didn't follow ordinary constitutional principles, which is what's led to, well, Planned Parenthood versus Casey. Is, this whole idea of, we're not quite sure what to do with Roe, so now we're going to add this undue burden test, which wasn't in Roe, but that's because Roe was just a convoluted conundrum of a penumbra. So, yeah. Anyway, but that's what I find. I kind of want. Who knows what the court's going to do? But and the court could strain really hard to try to find some way to decide this on some other lesser question,
technicality or loophole.
But they've said that they're addressing on this question, and that in and of itself is huge. I've been on the show before when court cases have come up before the Supreme Court, and people have said the sky is falling or the sky is beautiful, and I've kind of mentioned, it's like, well, hold on, it's really not that as big of a deal as you're making it out to be. This one's looking like it is, because this is squarely putting this question before the Supreme Court. So we're going to see what's happening. I think the argument's going to happen this fall, which means the decision probably is going to come out, around May, June next year, and we'll see.
Now, that's not to say also that if by chance the Supreme Court does overturn Roe,
right,
then the Senate can't just come right back and.
Well, and here's the other thing that people need to understand, that even if the court overturns Roe, that doesn't mean that abortion is now gone throughout the country. All it means is the states now have the right to decide for themselves whether or not abortion is going to be legal in their individual state. And you're going to end up with a situation where you're going to have a difference among the states, And that is, for those people that are pro-choice, that is one of the things one of their big beefs that they don't want to happen. And look, I understand why you don't want it to happen. I disagree with you. I do want it to happen, but I understand why you don't, because you're like, well, then somebody who's living in Texas isn't going to be able to get an abortion, but somebody over here is going to be. And yes, that's what the case is going to be. But abortion, it's not like Roe v. Wade is the be-all and end-all for abortion, period. That if we have Roe, we have abortion. If we don't have Roe, we don't. No, it's just going to fall back down to the states.
Yep.
I want to bring up something that whenever the abortion issue comes up, they always talk about it being about women's rights. Okay? And one thing that people don't consider is the case of a woman who's pregnant, wants her child, and somebody else takes it from her. If a woman who is pregnant, and Ken can back me up on this, but I remember asking your criminal justice professor about this at one point.
That must have just been a couple weeks ago, right? Because we haven't been out of college that long. I was a criminal justice major in undergrad, for anybody that's wondering.
But I know, but he says the tendency is, if a state is lenient on abortion and allows abortions to happen, then what tends to happen is, if a woman is pregnant and I'm sorry, BA just commented.
Yes, but he hasn't finished his comment yet.
I know.
He hit return too early.
Threw me off for a second.
There he is. What's up, guys? I came at a nice time. Yes, you did, BA. Perfect timing.
Hey, little brother. So anyway, my point is that you have two women, and they're both pregnant. We'll say it's the first trimester. One woman goes and gets an abortion, and the other woman gets beat up by her ex-boyfriend, or who knows, anybody, just somebody who wants to mug her or something. She loses the pregnancy. In both cases, but she survives. In both cases, the mother has survived. In both cases, the baby is gone. In a state where abortion is allowed, nothing is going to happen to the woman who has the abortion, but that person who beat up this woman and forced her to lose her pregnancy is not going to get charged with murder. They're going to get charged with only assault. And the fact that this woman lost a pregnancy she wanted is not going to have any bearing whatsoever on what happens to this person, man or woman. If it's the opposite, there are some states that are stricter on abortion than for the loss of the pregnancy, for the death of the unborn child, they could get convicted or at least charged with murder. And the only difference in both those cases is whether the baby was wanted or not.
Yeah, and I can't obviously speak to the law in all 50 states. And it sounds like what was that Dr. Haas who you were talking to? Yeah.
Yes, it was Dr. Haas.
Shout out to Dr. Kenneth C. Haas. There you go. He was my advisor in undergrad. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, you'd have to do a survey, and obviously that's something more that a criminal justice professor would know than a lawyer would know, because that's what they do. They compare the laws of the different states and everything like that. It wouldn't surprise me if it's a general tendency. I do seem to recall there are some individual states where that's not the case, where it as inconsistent as it may seem, that you do have some states out there that permit abortion, but then will still call it murder. Yeah, so it does.
And then again, the only question is whether the baby was wanted or not.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, from a Christian perspective, actually the Bible does speak specifically to this.
Yeah, it does.
Let's see. When men strive together and hit a pregnant woman so that her children come out, but there is no harm, the one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall impose on him. So it's up to the husband to tell them what to do, and he shall pay as the judges determine. But if there is harm, then you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. So specifically, there's a case in there about a woman who is pregnant, loses her child. It's up to the husband, well, in that
culture at that time,
to determine what happens to the attacker. Sometimes we wonder.
It didn't sound like it was up to him. It sounded like he committed murder. If she loses the child, if she doesn't, then it's up to the husband. That's what it sounded like you just said.
If there's harm, that's where it says then it's equal.
Yeah, equal
like punishment fits the crime.
Yeah.
So the harm being a loss of life, then
yeah.
And BA does here say new keyboard, new problems. BA, is that the keyboard that you were working with here? Because I don't see it here, and so I'm hoping you brought it home. Okay, I'm just making sure, because if not, Ben stole it. No, we love Ben. So
that's
anyway.
going to be Ken's birthday present for tomorrow. Surprise.
Oh, thanks for spilling those beans on that. Yes, I guess we're celebrating my last day as a 48-year-old today.
Woohoo.
So I'm not 60 yet. Oh, we've been going for 60 minutes. All right, let's move on to our next story, which actually kind of ties in, talking about, parental rights in relation to their children and everything like that. It kind of ties into that. And this story, actually our last two stories both come out of the UK. This is a story in the United Kingdom of an Orthodox Jewish young girl by the name, I don't know her exact age. I meant to look that up. I didn't see it, but it does sound like she's a minor. Her name is Alta Fixler, Fixsler. Now, she is a Jewish citizen, but she's residing in the United Kingdom, and she was born with a severe brain condition, all right? And so the article here doesn't say exactly what the brain condition is, but her parents have tried all sorts of medical treatments. They're in the UK, and they haven't worked, all right? Now, she is on some kind of life support. Now, what's happened here is the doctors at Royal Manchester Children's Hospital, which is where this young girl is, have filed a petition with the court to remove her from life support, which would result in her passing away. And they filed this petition even though the mother and the father don't want that to happen. They don't want her removed. Not only that, it gets even more complicated in the sense that Israel, where she's a citizen of Israel, has said, look, we'll provide her free care. We got two different hospitals here. You can bring her either one. She can come to either one of them, and she'll have care free of charge in Israel. All right. So they have that other option. In addition to that, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, and for those of people that say we're not equal opportunity folks here, we say we're independent. I'm going to give a shout out to Chuck Schumer on this. He's a Democrat, if you haven't figured that out, and he's doing the absolute right thing here. He has obtained a U.S. visa for Alta because her father is a U.S. citizen, okay? And he's also appealed to the UK health minister saying, bring her here. Bring her to the U.S.
Here.
And she'll have treatment here. you know? So you've got the United States offering to treat her. You've got Israel, where she's a citizen, offering to treat her free of charge. And the hospital, however, is saying, no, we want to withdraw life support. Well, the judge, and I don't know what's going to happen. I'm assuming there's going to be appeal, but what's happened most recently is there was some dispute over whether or not the child was suffering or not, whether Alter was suffering. Some doctors there at the hospital said, yes, she is. They had some doctors actually from the U.S. that said, no, she doesn't really show signs that she's in any kind of suffering. The judge said that while he was not really completely convinced that Alta was actually suffering at all, nevertheless, he felt he was going to go with the recommendations of the medical professionals in the United Kingdom. And he based this on her having no, quote, quality of life, all right? And so he says because she has no quality of life, ending her life would be in her best interest. Put a pin in that. I'm sure we're going to come back to that one.
Yes.
But here's the one that took the cake. He's talking about whether or not she can be moved to Israel, to take Israel up on its offer to treat her for free at one of these two hospitals. He says he'd have to assess the safety risk of that because of the recent exchanges between Israel and Hamas. It might pose a danger to her. And so the solution is to kill her. I mean, that's completely illogic of that. It's like, well, I'm not sure she'll be safe if we move her to Israel, so we're just going to kill her here. I mean, all right, I've said enough. Ben, go.
This is one of those stories where you have to double check.
I just want to point out that I did find out she's 2.
Oh. She's 2?
Wow.
It says 2-year-old. You said Fixler?
Alta
yeah.
Fixler.
Yeah. She's 2 years old, and the parents of the brain damaged. This was something from BBC News that was posted about 5 hours ago. It says headline says European court rejects appeal over Jewish girl's life support.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it says the parents of a brain-damaged Jewish toddler have lost their appeal at a European court to stop a hospital withdrawing her life support treatment.
I hope she has more
Where
appeals.
exactly are her parents at?
They're also residing in UK.
Yeah, they're
with
in
her.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is one of those stories where you have to look at this and do more research to say, is this for real? Because it's so unbelievable. And I like you put a pin in the other comment about her, the state deciding what is in her best interest. Because, yeah, it has ramifications beyond just Alta's case. Obviously it's very troubling. And man, my heart goes out to Alta's parents, especially. I could only imagine being in their position. And like you said, Ken, I hope that they have more appeals. I hope that this gets turned over. And I hope that, for the sake of Alta and her family, and ultimately the precedent that it sets for all children in the UK, and it could spill out into the rest of the world, and the US included. Because when we think about the precedent that this sets, and I'm going to pull that pin back out, the precedent that effectively Justice MacDonald, which is the judge in the UK, who's saying, yeah, I'm going to side with the Manchester Children's Hospital and say that, it's in her best interest to pull her off of life support. Effectively, what he's determining is that here again, you got the interest of the individual or interest of the parent versus the interest of the state. He's saying the state really now is the state trumps what the parents, the parental rights.
Just to throw this out there, I'm sorry, is that what I'm reading also says, and I don't know if you saw this or not, says that the parents were arguing, since they are Hasidic Jews, they're arguing that the hospital's plans are against their Jewish faith.
Yes, that
as well as their rights as parents.
Yes. Right. So there's so many different elements. Not only, you're right. Not only is it parental rights, it's religious liberty. It's this hits on so many different issues, all in one case, and that's why I'm just astounded that Justice MacDonald would even go there. And man, I pray that this is stopped here because it's got so many. It's going to have a ripple effect.
Well, I also, and Ryan Aronowski here on YouTube says, reminds me of the 2017 Charlie Gard case in England. Yeah, yeah, it does. And I don't know, coincidence, this is also in England or UK. I'm not sure. I remember saying where in the UK. Oh, yeah,
Manchester.
The trials in London, Manchester.
Yeah.
So it just, part of me just wonders, why are you so adamant about killing this young girl? I mean, if you can't even make the argument that, look, she's overburdening hospital resources or anything like that. Other facilities are willing to take her, so let them take her, and then she's not your problem anymore. And I guess it just boggles my mind. And I get it. There's probably someone in her condition. There's probably an awful lot involved in transporting this individual. But that's a side question. If that's the objection, okay, let's talk about how we can work that out and what the solution is for that. But that's not even the discussion that's being had. The discussion that's being had is whether or not her quality of life means we should kill her. You know what? If there's if the parents don't want that, and there's other medical facilities that disagree with you and are willing to take her in, then you shouldn't be making a decision about her quality of life. I'm sorry. That's just not, at that point, that decision's left your bailiwick.
Are they not entitled to a second opinion?
Well, they're saying, she has no, according to them, they're saying she has no chance of recovery.
Well, how many stories have we seen, though, of people who had no recovery?
The parents say that palliative care is against their religion. And,
And BA here says, please tell me they could sue to stop this. Well, that's what they have been doing, BA. And in the UK courts, they've been losing.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know whether they have any additional appeals. And understand something. And here's an important distinction to understand. We here in America are talking about this because we do have the legal system in America is set up such that the parents' rights, by and large, not that they can't abuse them and lose them, obviously, but by and large, parental rights trump the state's rights when it comes to raising kids. That's the way our system's supposed to work. A parent could forfeit that if they abuse a kid or anything like that, but by and large, that's supposed to be the default rule. That's not the case in the UK. The UK, their legal system isn't structured that way, and so that's where you see things like this happen, where it's like, the state is kind of looked at as almost the primary caregiver for the kid. And so even though the parents want to take their child to another country or back to her home country even, the state says, no, we have the top priority. Therefore, we're the caretaker for the kid. And we think the kid should be withdrawn.
Even though in this case, she's not even a citizen of
the UK. I know.
Yeah, this is the family's lawyer, David Foster, speaking. It says they are extremely disappointed. It is a position no parent would like to find themselves in. Alta's parents, and this is not part of the quote, but it says Alta's parents had hoped that ECHR, the European, let's see, what does that sound for? I don't know, it's not, European Court of Human Rights, which is where they took their appeal to. Had hoped that ECHR would agree that the original ruling, quote, did not give adequate cognizance to their religious beliefs, he said. Mr. Foster said it was a worrying precedent that foreign nationals who were offered care overseas were not allowed to pursue these options.
Understatement.
Okay. And then the next quote is, we are considering our next steps. The legal route has ended. So they don't have any place else to go, legally speaking. But it is still the case that an agreement could be reached. I don't know what that means exactly, and then it says, we also believe that excessive weighting has been given to, quote, causing pain as a factor in the decision.
So that article is saying that they have no further appeals?
Yeah.
That's what it
sounds like.
He's saying that the legal route has ended. That's the quote from the family's lawyer.
Wow. Well, then take a look.
But it is still the case that an agreement could be reached.
They're going to try and negotiate, but they have no negotiating power.
Maybe they have the power of suing civilly.
Largely, this would be a civil case. So, I mean, now I want to read this paragraph. You mentioned something about pain. They're worried about causing her pain. Listen to this paragraph that's from this article that we were reading on. It says, ultimately, the judge said that while he was not fully convinced that the child was suffering, he nevertheless felt that he should go with the UK medical professionals. Alta, having no quality of life, should not have to suffer. Enough. You see where ending her life would be in her best interest. Wait a minute. I thought you just said you weren't convinced she was suffering, and now you're saying, but she shouldn't have to suffer. And what I want to get to, I see Ryan. I'm going to ask you his comment. We'll get to that in just a second. I promise. We see it, Ryan. Is the other thing that disturbs me about this is since when does the state or anybody get to decide, quality of life? That is such an amorphous standard that is ripe for abuse. That should terrify people.
Yeah.
And when the state can say, well, we know you're alive, but we don't think your life is of a high enough quality to go on living, so we're going to kill you.
Anybody on life support, anybody who's catatonic, anybody in a coma, anybody.
We learn. If you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And I'm not going to, because it's just not politically correct nowadays to say the particular historical political party that I'm referring to, but we all know who it is. Okay. This is exactly what happened in the early 20th century in a certain European country, all right, amongst the medical community at the time. Is it started out with people who, had enough medical issues. We don't think that they're really considered human anymore at this point because they don't have a high enough quality of life. That when you let yourself go down that road, it evolves into expanding the definition of what qualifies someone for life, for the right to go on living. All right. History happens. We need to learn from it, and we need to send red flags up. This kind of thing is dangerous. Ryan, I would ask, now, am I saying that everything is a slippery slope, that just because this is the same pathway we saw people going on, down 100 years ago, that it's necessarily going to repeat itself? No, I'm not saying that.
It could go in a different
direction. It could go in a
direction
completely
that's
different direction.
no less terrible, though.
And it could be reversed. I don't know.
Yeah.
But at the same time, just because history doesn't necessarily have to repeat itself doesn't mean that we should be blind to the fact that it could repeat itself when we see the same things happening. All right. Ryan Iwanowski says here, I believe it's more about the medical official losing face. Once they say there's nothing they can do for the child, they can't have some other medical facility proving them wrong. Just my opinion. I mean, I don't know this medical official personally, obviously, but I think that's certainly a fact of human nature that people sometimes, all you have to do is see how long sometimes somebody will stick to a lie even after they've been clearly caught in it.
Clearly, they've doubled down here and won't even let her go to other facilities.
Yeah. And just, who cares if you... You're right. I at some point you just got to say, who cares, And how do you know you're going to lose face? Maybe they'll go there and they'll pass away. If you're so sure there's nothing that can be done, then what do you got to lose?
Right.
And if the fact that you're not letting them go, maybe this agrees with you, I guess, Ryan. If you're not letting them go, doesn't that tend to show that you at least have some doubt about whether you're right or not? Right. And if you have some doubt about whether you're right or not, what's the right thing to do? Come on.
Yeah. So. And I would kind of like to circle around to this. I'm just going to read this part of the article as well. It says, what might concern us most are two sections toward the beginning. This is talking about not only in the UN, but also the U.S. Article 3.1, now this is a U.S. law. It states that all actions by social service agencies, public and private, the best interest of the child shall be a primary consideration. Article 3.2 stipulates that state parties undertake to ensure the child such protection and care as is necessary, taking into account the rights and duties of his or her parents. So this is kind of outlining the provisions afforded by the social service agencies. I believe this is in the U.S. And the very next sentence says, while well-intended, the language nonetheless makes the government the final arbiters of the best interests of the child, while only giving parents a vote, but never a veto. Now, like you said before, I don't want to just blanket statement and say that parents should always have that right, because they can forfeit it through abuse or other such means. But yeah, I mean, I see the point that they're trying to make here too, is that, it is a slippery slope. Like in the U.S., we are nowhere near this point yet. But if this is allowed to gain traction in the U.K., then, we're seeing increasingly a global mentality of how things should be governed and decided, and countries borrowing from one another in their ideologies.
Well, I don't want to speak too specifically to this because you made me think of it, but it's not something I've looked at recently, so I don't want to get the facts wrong. But I will say, you say we're not close to this in the U.S. There have been instances. I want to say one relatively recently was in Pennsylvania. I could be wrong about that. At least individual incidents, maybe not broad sweeping policy of whole departments, but at least individual incidents where you have had social service people or adoption agencies or whatever basically saying that so and so are unfit parents, and the reason that they're saying they're unfit parents are because of, in the cases I've seen, specifically, Christian beliefs, and raising the child in that house. And so, again, I don't want to make it sound like this is some widespread phenomenon. I'm not saying that, and I don't want to give any more specifics than that because I don't remember them. But I know that I have seen some things coming up like that, which tends to give some credence to the fact that, look at the direction that the culture is going. You don't want to be alarmist about it. You don't want to say, oh my gosh, the sky is falling, but you also don't want to be blind. You gotta strike a balance in between. So, all right. So
before you go on, I just want to read the last statement that was made in this article that you guys don't have because, well, for whatever reason, you guys didn't print it out. And I don't know, maybe you can tell me. It says a spokesman for Manchester University NHS Foundation Trust. What
I'm not
do
sure.
we know what that is?
well, I think it's a Manchester. the hospital was.
Does NHS stand for something? Hospital something?
Or health, or I'm guessing.
Health system.
I'm wondering if the
National
hospital's
Health
related.
Services.
Maybe, or I'm wondering if the hospital, Royal Manchester Children's Hospital, I wonder if that's connected to the Manchester University. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it was a spokesperson for them,
Mhm.
so I'm not really exactly sure what their connection is, but they said we recognize that this is an incredibly difficult and distressing time for Alta's family, and we will continue to support them.
Sorry.
I figured you would get a little snarky over there.
I can tell you how you can support them.
But wait, listen to this. This was the final thing. Due to patient confidentiality, it would be inappropriate to comment further.
You know what? How about we start from the assumption that we shouldn't kill our patients? You start from that baseline, and then we go from there.
Do UK doctors still follow the Hippocratic Oath that do no harm?
Well, yes, and see, that's why it's captioned the way it is. The argument is such that she has no quality of life, therefore it's actually harming her to let her continue to live.
But she's not suffering.
Or she may or may not be.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. It's like there's also some very, speaking of Christian perspective, there's some very deep theological assumptions and presuppositions that are actually made here that are almost kind of potentially inconsistent if you don't adopt a Christian worldview, for example. Let me ask you a simple question. If there is no life after death at all, if this life is all there is, all right, how is it possible for the post-death state of non-existence to be preferable to a state of existence? Because if you don't exist, preferring something by definition assumes the existence of someone who's capable of preferring it.
And the will to desire it.
And so if you're comparing existence to non-existence, you can't say one. It makes literally no sense to say one is preferable over the other because someone who doesn't exist is incapable of preferring anything. True. And so there's some theological implications that's why it kind of bugs me when I see people say that. Well, it's preferable for her to die. Really? On what worldview are you saying that? Because if you're not adopting a Christian worldview, for example, if you're adopting a naturalistic worldview, then your comment literally makes no sense. Yeah. Literally makes no sense. Robert Koger here says, also, this topic in the abortion article may also be used in an assisted suicide discussion and evidence for or against. Robert, it's funny you should mention that. A lot of the arguments I'm making are born. There was a class I had to take, in seminary, because I'm taking seminary for a degree in apologetics, and it was an ethics class. It was a Christian ethics class, and the professor that taught it, I mean, his bugaboo issue was like assisted suicide, and he actually wrote a book on it, and an organ donation too. He got into, but that's a whole other topic. We won't go down that squirrel. But one of the topics we talked about in that class was assisted suicide, and you're not wrong. A lot of the arguments you hear me making here tonight were stuff that we talked about in that class in the assisted suicide scenario.
Well, it technically is just against her will, so it's assisted murder.
Yeah, but that's the whole quality of life thing especially comes up an awful lot in the assisted suicide discussion, and so you're right. All right, let's move on to our final story of the day because, oh my gosh, it's almost 7:00. We only had 3 stories tonight. How did this happen? How did this happen?
We always end up filling the time. All right, so our last article comes out of Christian Today. This is about a former Muslim by the name of, I apologize if I mispronounce this, Hatun Tash. And she is a former Muslim. She's converted to Christianity, and she is a regular critiquer of Islam. And so she actually is the leader of a ministry called DCCI, which stands for Defend Christ, Critique Islam. And mostly what she does, I guess under the auspices of this ministry, is that she engages in discussion about Christianity and Islam. And one of the main places that she does this is in London. So again, another story out of the UK in London. And there's a place in London called Hyde Park. And specifically in Hyde Park, there's a place it's called the Speaker's Corner. So it's this public space where speakers come and it's like an open air debate. So kind of like a modern, Greek Areopagus kind of a thing. And so it's an open air kind of debate space called Speaker's Park or Speaker's Corner. And so she was there, as she's done many times in the past, and she's critiquing Islam when she was attacked by a man wearing all black. And there's video footage of it, and she suffered stab wounds to her face and hands. And upon reviewing the footage of this, she said it's clear the intention was to kill her. This attacker had clear intentions to kill her, not only to just harm her. And what also kind of adds to this is that Miss Tash is kind of blaming this situation on police inaction. This is not the first time that she has been attacked.
Inaction, one word, not police in action.
Inaction.
Police in action.
not acting upon. Yeah. So she's blaming it on police inaction because this is not the first time she's been attacked. This is the most severe, and it's been an escalation up to this point. But she has described herself being, she's previously received death threats. She also reports having been slapped, punched, and knocked to the ground by Muslim men, people who disagree with her. Obviously, if she's critiquing Islam and as a proponent of the Bible, of Jesus Christ. So she's being represented by the Christian Legal Center, the CLC, and said that the police in London have had repeated failures to protect her from these threats. And now this is the escalation of that, this most recent attack. And by the way, this happened a week this past Sunday, so a week and 3 days ago. That's kind of where we're at now. There's this one, the CLC chief executive, Andrea Williams, has said that Sharia law, this is her words, Sharia law is being implemented there by the back door, effectively by the police's inaction. She said, and Sunday's incident is a serious escalation following a series of concerning episodes.
Yeah, and I would say...
Okay, before you speak, I found an article. I just want to say that not only was she attacked, but they arrested her.
Well, I don't think they arrested her in this incident. They arrested her in September.
There was one incident.
There was a previous incident where she'd been arrested for not leaving.
She was never charged with anything, but she was held for 23 hours.
That was one of the charges that the CLC is bringing against the police, is that unlawful detainment, I think, or what amounts to unlawful
so she actually has a
detainment.
civil case against them pending now for
because
that. She wasn't arrested in this incident, though.
But she was attacked. They arrested her, held her in a police cell overnight, and released her without charging her.
And we'll talk about that. I want to start with the last comment that you made, Ben, that, I can't remember who the quote was from, but the person who said that, Sharia law is being brought in from the back door.
That's the spokesperson, the chief executive, Andrea Williams of the CLC.
Yeah, and to make sure people understand what that comment is being, they're not saying, and I would not say, that the UK is, adopting legislative acts, adopting Sharia law. That's not what's happening. Yeah. It's maybe it's an analogy almost. It's maybe hyperbole. Yeah. Maybe it could have been done better. But essentially, what she's saying is, look, Sharia law makes it illegal to criticize Muhammad, and so when you punish people exclusively when they're criticizing Muhammad, or you don't stop people from attacking them when they're criticizing Muhammad, then you create the situation where for all intents and purposes, you're allowing them to enact their Sharia law beliefs, and you're not taking action against them. That's the accusation that's being made. I want to focus largely on this current incident, well, maybe a little broader than that. I'm going to start out by saying something that's maybe going to make some people upset, and we'll just hear me out because I'll make you happy with me again. Well, first of all, let's see. Okay, Robert Koger's got a couple comments here. He says, okay, first off, not saying I disagree with what she is doing. She is going out and evangelizing and working towards the Great Commission, which is in theory great, but I feel like she's doing it in a bad way, that she's practically attacking that faith, and that is not what Jesus would want, in my opinion. Okay, Robert, hear me out.
Pin in that.
Because that, well, not even a pin, because that's
Okay.
actually kind of leading into what I was going to say that was going to make some people mad at me. What she has done in the past is she has done some things, like she wears T-shirts with the Charlie Hebdo cartoons that are making fun of Muhammad. She's actually brought a Quran with her that literally has holes drilled into it to say, look at how many holes there are in the Quran, as a visual aid, as they call it. Do I agree with that method? No, I don't. And the reason is, we've talked about this before, of just being empathetic, gentleness and respect. I mean, that's what we're supposed to do. You got to know that type of thing is going to provoke.
Being a former Muslim yourself.
Yeah, exactly. You've got, and that you're really putting yourself behind the 8 ball as far as having any meaningful conversation at that point. You're generating an emotional reaction. You know you're going to generate an emotional reaction, or at least you should know. And so pretty much you're minimizing the possibility of having any meaningful discussion at that point in time. Now that I've said that, what does that have to do with this story and the attack that happened to her? Absolutely nothing. Zero. Zilch. If you believe in freedom of speech, the fact that someone is expressing speech that offends you does not justify violence against them. All right. Now, as a Christian within the Christian church, would I talk to her and if I were to meet her, would I say, look, I really don't think you should be going about it this way? Yeah. Within the Christian church, I would have that conversation with her. But what I do not agree with is people saying, bring that up almost as saying, look, it's almost like it's the she asked for it kind of thing. I'm not saying you're doing this, Robert. I want to make sure I'm clear on that. I'm not saying you're doing this. Don't take this that way. Okay, I'm not. I understand what you're saying. I do. And I agree with you. I don't think she should be doing this. But the reason I was going to bring this up is because I have seen it come up in some circumstances where it's almost like the she asked for it thing. And it's like, look, I can agree with you that she shouldn't have been going about this the way she was going about it. And I tend to agree with you. But you're going to tell me that a woman is asking to get raped based on the way she's getting dressed? I mean, come on.
Right.
No, nothing she did, especially considering if you really value freedom of speech. And to be clear, you talk about the speaker's corner. This isn't just something that was kind of customary over time, came to be this place of public debate. One of these articles talks about the fact that there was actually an act of Parliament I want to find the exact date here. I think I lost it here. I had it a second ago. 1872, an act of Parliament actually set aside this section of Hyde Park for public speaking. Now, this next one, I don't know if they really did themselves any favors. They talk about historic figures such as Karl Marx, Vladimir Lenin, and George Orwell were known to use the area to demonstrate free speech. Not sure if that's necessarily the 3 members of a trifecta I want to put up there as being,
however,
discourse.
But should they be entitled to speak? Yes.
Some of the articles I've found have said that okay.
So Robert says, yes, that's exactly what I was trying to say, but better. Thanks. Yeah, I got
Okay.
you, Robert. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I agree with what you're saying about being provocative, meaning your presentation is almost meant to provoke. More of a well, the first thing they said is that nobody's going to listen to you in Speaker's Corner unless you are that way, because everybody who speaks there is that way. Which, again, I'm not going to say that
that's a statement about our society. Maybe.
Well, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It is more of a statement on our society than whether or not she was doing the right thing. But it went forward to point out that includes Muslims there speaking in an equally provocative manner.
And I'll defend their right to do it.
Christianity.
I may disagree with them doing it, but I'll defend their right to do it.
And that's what I'm saying, is that you can't say she had it coming on her in her choice of presentation unless you say that they had it should be attacked equally in their
Well, and I don't know.
There's a logical end to it.
Right.
Well,
I don't know
I
if either
mean,
of you have seen the video or not.
No.
I did. Matter of fact, even before the story came out, because like right after it happened, and because I'm in a lot of apologetics groups, obviously on Facebook, and I don't know if the person who posted it was friends or knew her or not, but like right afterwards, somebody was posting some of the video that I got to see of the incident, and I will tell you that while her practice of wearing particular shirts, she was wearing one of these Charlie Hebdo cartoons at the time, might be provocative. She was not speaking in a provocative manner at the time. I mean, the video that I saw actually, had some other people talking in the foreground, and they were kind of in the background. But you could watch them, and there was no shouting, there was no yelling going on. You couldn't even really hear them, even though they weren't that far away. And then she just got attacked out of the blue. So you can't say that there was some kind of, in other words, you can't even try to say, well, maybe there was some kind of personal conflict where this person felt threatened or anything like that. No, it was an attack. It was an unprovoked attack. And the other thing that I wanted to mention that I never miss an opportunity to bash the media, no matter what country they're from. There was one of the articles I found here. Was talking about the way that this has been covered in the UK. And like, here's an example. Let's see. Oh, where was it? Now I'm trying to find it. I can't. It talks about the way they've been covering. It's largely just been saying, like, look, there was a 39. Here, the Metropolitan Police. There's a statement on it, says that a 39-year-old woman suffered from a minor slash injury to her head and was taken to the hospital, and the injuries are not life-threatening. And that's kind of how the
Pictures
UK
don't look very minor.
Well, and it wasn't just to the head. Yeah, she had a slash, and that may be the most bloody wound to the head, but she also had wounds to her hands and some other
Defensive wounds.
defensive wounds, because she was stabbed several times. Okay, now you see her stabbed several times. Does that mean like impaled to the gut that she's going to die? No, but she had several stab wounds where she was trying to defend herself from this person, and so I find it. I don't know what I find it just disappointing that apparently, if that's to be believed, the article that I read is to be believed, that most of the press in the UK that's been covering this has been basically saying, this 39-year-old woman suffered this minor slash to her head. And again, look at the pictures. It wasn't all that minor of a slash to the head. She's taken to the hospital. She's going to be fine. And just glossing over, all the other surrounding circumstances. And I will say again, I'm a big proponent of free speech. Obviously, I'm probably admittedly more sympathetic towards her because she was a Christian, but I would be equally upset if we found out that a Christian did this to a Muslim who was trying to have free speech at that corner. I mean, we marketplace of ideas, people. Let's hear people out, whether you agree with them, whether you vehemently disagree with them. We don't get anywhere as a society unless we let people talk.
Well, to the UK article, and also speaking a little bit to Ryan's point from the previous story, maybe this is kind of another case of the British media trying to save face because there are these other pending litigations against the police for failure to act before and wrongful detainment and all of this. And so to say, oh, it really wasn't as big of a ordeal as you may think, that could be a little bit of now I don't pretend to know the motivations behind them, but it seems to me, as I'm on the outside looking in on this, at least part of the motivation for trying to downplay something like this, and also maybe not to incite more violence, because that's
well, that's where we need to decide what the proper response is, because I will tell you, and I also did see a video of that September 2020 incident where she was arrested. I think it was September 2020, and what was going on there was the crowd around her was getting very riled up. And the police actually came up to her and told her she was going to have to leave. And she refused. She said, I'm not going to leave. And if I were to hazard a guess, and this is admittedly probably speculative, what was going through the police officer's mind at that point, they probably thought that removing her from the situation was the quickest and easiest way to quiet down the unrest that was clearly brewing at that time. Well, just because it's the quickest and easiest way does not mean it's the right way. If she wasn't yelling, she wasn't screaming, anything like that, but she did stand firm and was defending her right to speak and to say what she was wanting to say, and they arrested her for it, for essentially refusing to leave.
There's a quote from Haroon herself. She said, "In the past, they've seen it as easier to remove me than deal with people intimidating and threatening me."
Yeah.
So that's kind of
and you know what, you've got to. I guess maybe it's the price you pay for freedom. And you got to have a corner like this, and I'm all in favor of it, but you've got to be prepared to handle things in the right way. And if someone is speaking, and if you really value free speech, then the response is not to remove the speaker. It's to explain to the people that are, becoming progressively more and more aggressive, that it's the aggression, and especially if it amounts to violence, that's not permitted. It's not the speech is permitted, whether we agree with it, whether we disagree with it, whether it's somebody advocating for Christianity, whether it's somebody advocating for Islam, wherever it's somebody advocating for socialism, for capitalism, for whatever ism you want to attach to it, they're allowed to speak. And then we are also allowed to speak, to disagree with them, to attack their ideas, not their person, in order to show why their ideas should fail. And that's how society progresses. Society, and some people say, well, nobody's going to listen. Well, nobody's going to listen. It went to violence. The fact of the matter is, violence by its nature, bullying by its nature, is trying to get people to believe a certain way, not through rationality, not through reason, but through intimidation. And I've got news for you. Number one, that's no way to make progress, obviously. No way to point towards truth. And also, it's not lasting. If history teaches us anything, is that you intimidate and bully someone long enough, you bully the people long enough, they're going to get up and they're going to rebel against you.
Yeah.
So.
Eloquently put.
All right. Anything else on that one?
Yeah.
Oh, wait. We do have another comment here. I'm sorry. Ryan Awanowski says, Jesus publicly spoke up against the Pharisees and made provocative statements about being the Son of God, which was considered heresy. As Christians, do we blame Jesus for his crucifixion? Good point. No, I mean, and that's although he did go willingly, so that's another thing.
But even in the synagogue when they push him out and want to throw him off a cliff, or other times that failed when Jesus was able to slip away, right? Should we blame him for inciting that? No, he knew.
You speak truth, and you speak your mind. Say what your opinion is, and we'll have a conversation about whether we agree or we disagree. We should be able to do so respectfully. But even if we can't speak respectfully, because one or the other of us isn't being respectful about it, that doesn't justify violence. And when something like this happens, the police response should be, and again, in this instance, she wasn't arrested, but the earlier one she was, the police response and the state's obligation is to try to promote a safe environment for free speech to occur, not to remove the speech in order to quell the violence.
Yeah. I like how they kind of ended this article. It says, if Hatun is silenced by violence, then we all are silenced. It has further reaching implications that, we can't bend the knee to violence and intimidation.
So agree with her, disagree with her. We should all be able to, and that's why, just to be clear, that's why I wanted to start this out by getting people mad at me and saying, I don't agree with the way she goes about it. I don't. Because I think it's important to establish that groundwork to then go on to say, but I defend her right to do it, and I defend the fact that she was the one in this particular incident, the police, and the one in September, the police should be coming to her defense. Even though I disagree with the way she's doing it, the police should be coming to her defense and not removing her in order to quell the unrest, so to speak. So, all right, that everything? We get through it? Are we at a record time yet? We might be getting pretty close. I don't know. And we only had 3 stories. I'm glad we only had 3 stories tonight. We had a lot. Well, we did have a lot to talk about from last week, so that's part of what it was. So, hey, just by way of reminder, what we said at the top of the show, there is no show next week. We are taking next week off, which means if you're not watching us live, you have 2 weeks to put comments in the comment section, which means our next episode, when we come back, will be twice as long because we'll have 2 times as many comments to go through.
No, why aren't we having a show next week?
Because oh, am I allowed to say it? Y'all outed me.
He did.
Happy birthday to Ben. Happy birthday
tomorrow.
to Ben.
That's why I wanted to give you a chance to get your revenge, Ken.
Yes, because I thought I was above that, but given the opportunity, I clearly was not. No. Tomorrow is my birthday. Next Wednesday is Ben's birthday. We're almost birthday buddies, just 6 days and about 50 years apart.
Yeah, it's birthday time.
Robert Koger here says she's a little confused, but she's got the right spirit. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Do I agree with her message, Robert? Yes, I agree with her message. Obviously, it's the gospel message. It's that 1 Peter 3:15. Always be prepared to give everyone an answer for the reason for the hope that you have, but do so with gentleness and respect. You can't take the first part without listening to the but. Always listen to the but. Stop. However.
Listen to the however.
Listen to the however. So anyway,
let's cut off Pastor Jay before he says something.
He hasn't commented since the beginning. He might not be watching anymore. So because there's no way. Okay, we're gonna talk for I'm gonna keep talking for 20 seconds. There's no way if he's still watching, he could resist commenting after my always listen to the butt comment. Robert Koger says, "Ken, it's a meme." All right, dude. We just established I'm about to turn 49 tomorrow. That's why I have people like you here, Robert. I'm not in touch with any of that. You know that.
I understood that reference.
And I understood that reference. I did get that one. So, all right. We got to get going. It's late. But yeah, again, no show next week. We will be back in 2 weeks. Again, if you're not watching us live, please put your comments, questions, whatever, in the comments section on the YouTube page. And if you are watching us on YouTube, please like this video if you liked it. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Likes, subscriptions. Subscriptions going to make sure you're up to date on everything we have posting. Likes, comments, things like that.
Comment happy birthday to Ken.
Comment happy birthday to Ben.
Happy belated birthday to Mary Kay.
Those types of things do help it get seen by other people. The more comments, the more likes, the more views a video has, the more likely YouTube is to share it with other people. So we would ask you to do that. All right? That's all we got.
All right.
Have a good night. Have a happy birthday next week. I'll see
tomorrow.
you, but we won't see you on the air. So I'm going to say it now on the air. And thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Mary Kay. Thank you all for watching and commenting. Great show, great participation. We really love talking to you all. And we will see you all in 2 weeks. God bless.